Welcome to ASEAN People Speak Season 2. I'm Regine Jessica Abuel, your host for this podcast. For our final episode this season, we will be joined by a dedicated human rights advocate in Singapore and ASEAN. She will share with us her experience and learning in the involvement of civil society organizations or CSOs in human rights development amidst key ASEAN milestones. She is a former nominated member of parliament in Singapore, a two-term former president of the Association of Women for Action and Research, or AWARE, and a former vice president of Action for AIDS. She led Transient Workers Count 2 and its precursor, the Working Committee 2, or TWC2, from 2002 to 2007, and is one of the founding members of MARUA, or Singapore Working Group for an ASEAN Human Rights Mechanism. She is also the regional president of the International Council of Social Welfare for Southeast Asia and Pacific, and has previously worked as a teacher, a journalist, and in senior management and in research. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Ms. Braema Mathi. Yay!
Thank you. Yeah.
Good evening,
Very
Ms.
lively
Braema.
introduction. Yes, thank you. Yeah.
Thank you, Ms. Braema, and very lively also to see you. I like the energy. I am actually loving your energy tonight. Ms. Braema, how are you there? How's Singapore, if I may ask?
I'm good. It is cooler weather here in Singapore, so that's really lovely. And some mornings it's heavy rain, but you still have to wake up and get on with work.
Yes.
Yeah.
Even if sometimes you feel like it's a bad weather,
Yes, that's right.
you have to push yourself to go out of the bed and do your work.
Yes.
Nevertheless, we are happy that you are with us tonight or today. So, Ms. Braema, as we are going to go through the last episode for ASEAN People Speak Season 2, we are going to focus our discussion on the role of CSOs in human rights development, specifically the human rights architecture in the ASEAN region. I guess my first question for you now is that, based on your experience, what was the role and influence of CSOs in human rights institutionalization in the ASEAN region?
Right. Thank you very much for that question. I think it's an important question, and we need to document that history quite well and also hopefully more accurately, because I'm going to share from my perspective, but I think this has to be a proper documented approach for posterity. Yeah? So I came onto the scene because I was a researcher at the Institute of Southeast Asian Studies, and I was doing work on Southeast Asia, ASEAN, and came to Manila a few times on track 2, the academic side, to present papers. There was the APA at that time, ASEAN People's Assembly. But it also was a forum of academics, think tanks, as well as some CSOs. But that interplay of discussions was important, because that is when you suddenly realize, for me at that time, I woke up to realizing there are all these discussions coming through ASEAN under the Secretariat. And Secretariat, of course, the binding force are all the leaders of the 10 ASEAN countries that before then, I had not heard of Hanoi Action Plan, Vientiane Action Plan. So it was a very fast tracking to know all of this, and the potential that there were discussions of forming a charter. And from there, the CSOs were saying we can't have a charter without a human rights discussion as a main platform. So from there, I got into the swing of things too, because I was also involved in CSOs. And that is when I came across, and they also came across, was the Working Group for ASEAN Human Rights Mechanism. And Carlos and RP were there, and we all got to know each other. And then I met the whole group with representatives from many of the ASEAN countries. But what was important beyond the meeting, they are lovely people, and I love the the intellectual discussions that we were having, there was a focus that we need to play a part and give our views as ASEAN Charter is being shaped, as well as finding inroads to meeting with important people, the experts from the different countries. So that was the opening route. And once we found that, and in the case of Philippines, both Mr. Carlos and Mr. RP also got involved with the state actors. But it also meant that all of us who are not directly involved with state actors, we could still form our papers, have our discussions, and find inroads. So what were the inroads? Many of us were told, find your local actor at the national level, which meant for many of us the Ministry of Foreign Affairs line. Who is that representative? Because they are the ones who are meeting to discuss this, and they bring in, later it was called the high level task force and all that. They bring in experts from within their own country, and so a few layerings, but you have to make that inroad. So we did. Under Marwa, we did, and we had engagements at the national level. In bigger countries, it is more layered. You have to meet, like Indonesia, provincial, national, etc. So what was good is that we were meeting regionally to discuss what were the interventions, consolidate on paper to be accepted as a representative document for ASEAN level, and yet at the national level, knowing the nuances of your country, knowing what they will be quite resistant to or very open about, you have to navigate. So for me, it was a huge learning experience in itself. And I learned as a CSO, the whole approach of navigation, diplomacy, and still being focused on producing evidence and substantive arguments as to why we feel that it ought to be this way. So that is one whole track that was happening. I will also quickly summarize the other track that was happening. So this is a little bit like a 2.5, whatever, to the track, the think tank group. But there's also the CSO, the ground level players or national representatives. For some are ground level that can go even to district, and some are national. This took a number of years, but at that time we were working a lot at the national level. So the women's group at the national level, the migrants group, these groups have to come on board. So we had other instruments, other conversations that were taking place in various capitals, both at the national level and regional level, and CSOs came together. Many of the CSOs at that time didn't even like what is that ASEAN? What is that charter? The level was low, but we all had to ramp up quickly because the academics came in to explain many parts. So that's when SAPA came in. I forgot now what SAPA stands for, but they came in and they also formed a group of CSOs all discussing. So there were parallel tracks of CSOs, track 3, track 2 discussing ASEAN. Then a lot of following where the meeting points by governments were happening. So if it was Thailand, a few of us will appear in Thailand. If it was Manila, if it was Kuala Lumpur, and finding intervention spaces besides sending in documents. The last part of it in this whole process was when governments opened up some of the discussions to meeting. From their perspective, they selected the CSOs that they wanted to meet. This is good, at least CSOs have a space, but it also caused its own problem because many CSOs felt at that time and still feel today, why am I not good enough? I am churning, I am a ground player, I have got the information, and then you CSO, you take it up, you consolidate it. So this will always remain a point of we have to manage it at the CSO level, but the intervention space that was created was important. Lastly, what did we gain? ASEAN Charter, of course, we asked for the moon and everything else, the stars and all of that. But of course, it got moderated at every level. And
I
finally,
like Sorry,
what
I
is
like that you mentioned that you targeted the moon and the stars, but then, of course, it was a long shot. And
that's right.
throughout the episodes, actually, in the podcast, we have also seen the different perspectives of states, of
Yeah.
even CSOs, in the level of pushing for the ASEAN Charter. And I just want to point out that it was really an effort, a very big effort of for everybody to establish that charter. And it was indeed shooting for the stars and the moon. But it was also, I think, still an achievement despite the fact that what wasn't seen in preliminarily as a vision, there was still a compromise, or at
Yeah.
least
Yeah.
a certain state wherein everybody agreed. And
Yeah.
that was still an achievement on the part of ASEAN member states to be able to have a grounding in some sort of accountability for
Yeah.
ASEAN states or ASEAN member states. Sorry, you
I
were saying?
Yeah,
My
yeah, no, I
apologies.
think you have opened another interesting area that I can share my thoughts on. I think
Mhm.
this was, many of us also forget in the whole process, CSOs played a part. Huh? You influence, you become quite direct in what you want, but also CSOs are learning. Huh? So from the moon and the stars, you also finally know what is possible and how far above
Mm.
the possible do you go, and how, what is the navigation that you do. It will not be a happy place for all CSOs. Some would feel you should have gone harder, you should have not
Yeah.
given in and all that, but we accept it. So like you said, there are compromises. Some of it
Mhm.
not everyone will be happy with, and
Mhm.
some of it, I think, is the best case scenario that one could have. But what is more important, I think, considering what the CSOs had done this crucial period, because we really ran very fast, we galloped quite quickly on the charter, because the charter was finally came into being in 2007, and Marwa was formed in 2007, so it's a very fast uphill, not only for me, for many CSOs coming on
Mm.
board. But we became clearer when it became to the AICHA, the ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on
Oh,
Human
the
Rights.
Eicher,
That's right.
yes.
And onto the AHRD, the ASEAN Declaration on Human
Human
Rights, right?
rights.
Where I think the experience, knowing your terrain, the knowledge base had grown. So I think it was easier to grapple onto the key nuggets and also build up the navigation. Some of it is you lose, you lose. But you
Yes.
have no choice but to accept it. Some of
Mhm.
it, the space that was given to CSOs also shrunk depending on which country. Not all 10 member
Mm.
ASEAN states function in the same manner. Some
Mhm.
are open. In my country, there will be a lot of rationalizing why we cannot go there. So you put your point of view, it's rationalized, you try again, and then after that, that's the end. In some countries, people protested in the streets. So different levels of engagement to finally arrive at the documents that we have. Mm.
Mm. I like that you actually described to us already. I like actually the way that you already described to us, Miss Brima, the evolution of CSO involvement in the promotion and protection of human rights in the ASEAN region. You've mentioned a while ago that it first started with the ground CSO as a ground level player, and then CSOs may or may not have the backing of the state, so they
Mm.
also have to work their way through. Some
Mm.
actually have the support of their ministries of foreign affairs in other
Yeah.
countries. Some
Yeah.
actually are also represented by ambassadors and diplomats themselves.
Yeah.
But I appreciate that you have mentioned to us that CSOs have had different engagements, or the way that they try to deal with human rights is not just in a very
Yeah.
lateral or a fixed approach.
Yeah.
It's actually a different or a different pronged approach. And in line with that, may we know, Miss Brima, if is there, because of the things that you have mentioned a while ago, and the evolution that it has, the CSOs have had in the ASEAN region, was there an increase or a decline in CSO participation or its involvement in the ASEAN region throughout the years? And why
Yeah.
do you think there is an increase, or maybe there was a decline?
Okay, thank you for that, because I think what you have asked is an important plotting. Huh? It's an important plotting. 1993, the Vienna Declaration took place, and many of the
Mhm.
I've even read what our foreign ministers said at that time. I'm looking at it when I first found it, because of this human rights work. I thought, wow, all this was said, but after it was said
Yes.
in 1993, nothing much really happened. These are some of the
Mm.
realities. So
Mhm.
documentation of all this is very important. But within this working group, right, that found me and I found them, right, they had been there. Some important folks like Mr. Mazuki from Indonesia, Mr. Param, Dr. Professor Vitit, right? They were all there participating and forming this little group that had been formed. So there were earlier
Mm.
players, then more came. Today, there are many CSOs because of a lot of capacity building, knowledge sharing, funders putting in the money to build up a cohort, plus many regional groups taking over this area. For example, like Forum Asia, and there are many other groups. I can only think of one name now, but there are also many other groups that are following issue based, like Migrant Forum, right? They're focusing Migrant Forum Asia, the Women's Group, APWLD, and many others. So it is delineated by thematic issue, but it is inclusive of NGOs, CSOs, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, CSO, direct service providers at very different levels in each country. So over the years, I have participated in forums where Indonesian CSOs that are more like in the district level, almost in some form of a rural setup, they can come to the table and share thoughts on what ASEAN needs to do for them under their human rights. And this whole thing that we are discussing now, food security, I heard it almost about 5 or 6 years ago from such a space that I was there, and I was thinking, wow, I never thought of food security, because my country, Singapore, we are importing all the food, right?
Yes,
But there we
yes.
have a supplier who's sharing. So I think we have multiplied, knowledge has increased, and it is also good that AICHA now has a consultative a system with certain CSOs, but there are not many. When I looked at my last look at the website was only 30. We need more. 30 divided by 10 is a miserable 3 per country. So we need to widen that scoping. And the other
Yes,
part,
yes.
and the other part, my last bit on the CSOs is that the CSOs also have learned how to share their thoughts and their advocacy with regional groups or national groups, so that the point is still made to AICHA. And they are asking for accountability by AICHA. But these are all the limitations of AICHA as a body, which I will hold for now, depending what you're going to ask me next. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
But thank you so much, Miss Brima, for pointing out the different ways that CSOs have actually multiplied because of many capacity building mechanisms throughout countries. I like the fact that you actually mentioned a while. I like the fact that you mentioned food security a while ago,
Yeah.
um, coming from
In
maybe
Philippines.
countries that have been producing food for how many years already, but food security is an issue. So
Yeah.
that is a very good thing that you've pointed out. And um I think you've also mentioned a while ago ICHR, or ASEAN Intergovernmental Commission on Human Rights.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. Do you think, for you personally, has ICHR been um has ICHR been helpful in the advocacies of CSOs, or from the ground?
Oh, that's a bit of a tough question. Not tough in answering, but how to do it politely and diplomatically without burning the boat, right? Yes, that is what it is. I think a lot of the ICHR reps, they are government representatives at the end of the day, and under the whole book, right? It is clearly stated how far they can go, and every time whenever we ask tougher questions, like for example the Myanmar, the Rohingyas, in the whole episode, right, then if at the state level the country feels this is how far we are willing to go, then the ICHR rep cannot go beyond. So there's a lot of dependency, on our more democratic and more open member countries like Indonesia, Philippines, Thailand, Malaysia. That their ICHR reps either individually, sometimes they don't speak as a group because ICHR has a consensus mode like ASEAN. So these are, I think, some of the stress points and the flaws, because we are very happy, ICHR, as a body to make statements, to raise awareness on natural disasters. A cyclone, yes. And we have learned, the tsunami has taught us a lot of things, how we have to become a community, and the Nagi cyclone in Myanmar, Burma, Myanmar at that time. All this have taught us how to respond to a humanitarian disaster. But conflicts, which really erases a whole community, like 1 million people living not in an ASEAN country, in Bangladesh, Cox's Bazar, right? And so what is our intervention point? It was rather weak. And where were the stronger intervention areas? They came from the CSOs at national level, regional level, and international level, right? So there must be a greater accountability by ICHR in its annual reports. I think that it has shifted. What we were talking about earlier, the earlier part that you asked me, was from maybe the early 2000s. We are now 2022. And we all know that we are facing a lot of global stresses, a lot of it, not only from climate change. Look at Russia invading Ukraine. There are lots of conflicts. We have South China Sea. We have Taiwan. The countries are doing their own diplomacy in Southeast Asia, which are good. But the CSOs are also keeping tabs. We are all watching. ICHR can play a bigger role in all of this. So I will cite my appreciation for the Indonesian ICHR rep, Miss Yuyun. She is doing forums after forums, building up knowledge for a lot of people, but with a lot of interventions by a few ICHR representatives. Today we have some form of a complaints mechanism. I do not know the nature of this complaints mechanism, but we want to know. People send you the complaints, then where does it go? What happens to it? So one avenue has opened up. It's good. But what is the next step? So that is what I will say about the ICHR at this point, and also Indonesia and Philippines. I think people do give their views on who should be their ICHR reps. Yeah.
All right. Thank you very much for that.
I'm so sorry. I can go on. So please come in to stop me. Yes, thank you.
No, it's okay. It's totally fine. It's nice to hear your opinion about ICHR, but I also want to emphasize, I guess, that what the ICHR cannot probably do, the CSOs are able to fill in the gap.
Yeah.
Would you agree with me for that?
I
when
agree.
I say that?
Oh, sorry, I agree with you totally on that. And I forgot to mention earlier, my apologies. And the lovely surprise that took place was the recent. There were recently more comments on Myanmar, which are good, stronger comments, and also all our foreign ministries through ASEAN um, took a stronger renouncing the invasion of Russia into Ukraine. I think these are positive things. Yeah.
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 And other than that, though, thank you, Miss Brima, because I think this gives us a very good idea of how CSOs have really played a very, very big role in the human rights architecture in the ASEAN. It's not just about the ICHR or institutions or state members, but CSOs who actually work from the ground level up. And based on what you have mentioned a while ago, it's the way that CSOs engage themselves in different ways, not just not just in the state level, but they also go up to the very core of human rights issues by going to different places or sectors, especially marginalized sectors in society. And because of that, there has been somehow a multiplier effect because people are more empowered, and because of these capacity building programs or activities, other CSOs have also developed, or maybe other CSOs have also been created throughout the region. Ms. Brima, I just want to ask, maybe for our last question for tonight's episode, I want to ask you, do you have any recommendations then on how to improve CSO participation, given the fact that you have given us your opinion on ICHR and the CSO participation in the ASEAN region? But we know that there are a lot of things that are still yet to be improved. But do you have any recommendations or suggestions, in your opinion, in order to achieve regional cooperation and human rights?
Thank you. That's very good. I think CSOs, I love that word that you use, multiplier effect. There is a multiplier effect. Therefore, definitely the next part must happen, solidarity. To keep people in a knowledge groove, to keep people in an advocacy groove, and evidence base. Evidence base is crucial. And today with social media and all, very fast information can come out. So there must be certain levels of accountability too by CSOs in what they put out, and some level of diplomatic advocacy needs to come in, because we have learned from asking for the moon and the stars, and we are now like, let us get what we can and stagger it across a time period. So that, I think, is important. So kudos to the CSOs that we have asked. It's already a number of years now that we have ICHR and we have the AHRD. So is it time to change, amend some of the some of the institutional structuring, etc. I think that kind of advocacy must go on. Change can only happen when we keep doing it consistently, right? I think that's important.
Right. That's a very nice point that you have given, Ms. Brima. Yes, we would like to emphasize on that.
Yes, thank you. And the last part is there are parallel tracks happening. So this is the regional level. Certain countries are stronger at the national level. They can make the changes at national level advocacy with their own governments. Some of us are also engaged in the international level with UN and all that. So I feel all this we have to participate and put our energies. So I will say that CSOs will continue to work very hard, and hopefully the last part is that governments will have to wake up more strongly, have to realize more determinedly and strongly that constructive engagement with CSOs must really happen with also the private sector. You cannot cocoon oneself, just CSOs talk to CSOs or government talk to government and private sector talk to private sector. We cannot make good changes if that continues. We have to come together. Yeah, that is what I'll say. Yeah.
Wow, that was a very, very nice way to actually end the episode, Miss Brima. Actually, it gives us a lot of hope too. I like the fact that you mentioned also that it shouldn't be just the CSOs working hard. It should also be, there should also be some participation on the part of the private sector, and also the governments or different state members. So it's not just CSOs doing its best to promote human rights and to advocate for its protection and promotion, but the private sector also has to play a role. The state also has to play a role. Government agencies and departments and its agents also have to play a role. On that note, Miss Brima, do you have any messages probably, or things that you would like to share with our listeners for the last time before we end the episode tonight?
Yeah, I think it's wonderful that this kind of forum podcast is taking place, and we should do more of it. I mean, CSOs, we will always feel, oh, we were pioneer thinkers on, let's say, climate change, and now the whole world is talking. It's okay. We still have to get down to getting what it needs to be done, and therefore that has to remain our focus. Yeah.
And on that note, Miss Brima, I'd like to thank you again for joining us tonight in our episode. And the thing that we could probably bring home tonight, other than your insights and wonderful sharing, is that the constructive engagement with CSOs, the private sector, and the government will hopefully bring human rights into the limelight. Or at least, you mentioned a while ago, climate change was just a buzz before, but now we are talking about it. Everyone is engaged about it, and that's when it all happens. That's when change happens, right?
Yeah.
Thank you so much again, Miss Brima, for that. And that's all for today's episode for ASEAN People Speak. Thank you all for listening, and thank you, Miss Brima, for joining me today. Miss Brima, would you want to promote your social media accounts or websites or organization, any publications or upcoming projects?
Yeah, thank you. Please look at Marua's website. Marua means dignity in Malay, which is Singapore's national language. But also do look up ASEAN. There are many groups. Forum Asia is one that keeps coming to my mind because I cannot remember so many other groups. It's a multiplier, like what you said.
Yes.
Yes. So thank
you.
Because
CSOs have multiplied throughout the years.
And
but thank you also to old CSOs that have already made their presence or their presence felt in the region. I think Marua and all other CSOs in the early 90s, even in the early 2000s, have also given a big they have given a big and positive impact in the region, that it has actually multiplied, or it has been a catalyst for other CSOs to be organized or created as well. So thank you for that. And we will definitely promote Marua and your other organizations, Ms. Brima. So that concludes the ASEAN People Speak Season 2. Thank you everyone for joining us since the first episode of this season. Of course, our sincerest gratitude to our esteemed guests in all our 6 episodes. We couldn't have made it this far without your support and your knowledge and all your sharings. We are looking forward to seeing you all again, hopefully in the next season. For the meantime, make sure you are subscribed to the podcast on Spotify, where you can listen back to this episode and to the other previous episodes. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube channel at WG ASEAN HRMEC and visit our website at aseanhrmec.org for the latest updates. Again, thank you all for joining us in ASEAN People Speak Season 2. This has been your host, Regine Jessica Abuel. Thank you all and good night. Bye-bye.
Bye bye.